for joining us today. My name is Ian Scott, and I am the founder of Scott Legal. And today we're going to spend some time talking about the EB-5 program, both the Regional Center program and the Direct Investment program. And before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First, the presentation, the webinar will be recorded, so you will receive the recording after the webinar. You'll also receive a copy of the PowerPoint presentation along with an EB-5 guide that will go over some of the things that we talk about today in a bit more detail. So all of those will be sent to you after the meeting. If you do have questions during the meeting, please feel free to put them in either the Q&A function or the chat function. We will get to all questions during the meeting. And the other thing we'll send you after the meeting is a link where you can set up a consultation if you would like to go through your specific fact pattern. So with that, why don't we get started? The EB-5 program, it's an exciting time in EB-5 world. Many of you have probably heard of the September 30th, 2026 date, which is one that there's a big push to file as many regional center petitions as can be filed, because if they're filed by that date, then the government has guaranteed that they will actually adjudicate them and we won't run into the same problem that we ran into in 2021. So that is a big push. We're very busy working on a lot of regional center EB-5 petitions, and that will continue, I think, right through to September 30th. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is just the difference between the regional center and direct investment. And really, we'll talk about it in the context of the profile of investors. So what you would see if you had a regional center, someone who was interested in a regional center versus what you might see if you had someone that was interested in direct investment. And typically here, what we see is a regional center is someone who's interested in investing in a regional center is someone who really is a passive investor and wants the green card and wants to just kind of give someone else money and then have them be the one that's responsible for creating the jobs and everything else. So the way that this works is there might be, for example, like a large hotel chain that wants to raise capital through the EB-5 investor program. They might do this capital raise by using a regional center and getting a number of people who want the green card to invest the requisite funds into the program. And so usually the administrative fees or administration fees are quite high for these programs, usually between $35,000 and $50,000 a year. So that's something to keep your eyes on as well, because if you're doing direct investment, which we're going to talk about in a minute, you'll see that the direct investment is actually something where you wouldn't, where you actually wouldn't have to pay that administration fee. The other thing with regional centers is that indirect jobs can be counted. So if they're, for example, that example that I use with a hotel chain, if the person is, or if the company or the entity that's being developed, the hotel, let's say that there was a dry cleaner down the street or restaurants down the street, and there was ancillary employment that was being generated through those indirect means, those could count towards the job creation requirements, and that only relates to regional centers. So the direct investment, on the other hand, those are people who really want a little bit more control over their destiny. They might be entrepreneurs. We often move people from E2 visas to direct investment regional centers, where they may start a business or invest the requisite amount of funds in a particular business, and then they're responsible for directing, managing that business, and they're also responsible for hiring the employees. So that's the two different types of investors that you might end up seeing. And, really we get a number of people who are just interested in the passive investment, but then also a number of people who, as I said, are entrepreneurs, don't want to pay the high administration fees and move more towards the direct investment. So today we're going to talk about the kind of two fundamental requirements for EB-5, the job creation and the investment, and then we're also going to talk about how a petition is filed. So the EB-5 requirements are, really quite straightforward in the sense that they're clear and they're objective. You have to invest either $800,000 or $1,050,000, depending on where the business is located. If the business is located in what's called a targeted employment area. So that's an area that's rural population by designation of the area, or an area where the unemployment rate is at least 1.5 times the national average. So the unemployment rate is around 4%. So we'd be looking at about 6%. And we would go to the actual census tract to determine what the unemployment rate is. But all of those can invest 800,000. The rest of the people would invest 1,050,000. Now, it is investing in what's called a new commercial enterprise, but that's something that's been developed after 1990. And then the investment can be made over time. You should have the investment all made before you actually apply for the EB-5, but you could. We did for example, an EB-5 for a farm, and this person had invested 100,000 over a period of years. And once they had invested the requisite amount, then we apply for the EB-5 for them. And the investment does have to come from outside of the company. So if the company's making a lot of money, and let's say that the company has retained earnings of a couple $1 million, like let's say they've earned that, and then they spent it the next year, that wouldn't count as investment. The money does have to come from outside of the company. So that's something to keep in mind. The EB-5 is very different from E2. When you're looking at E2, even if you purchase a business, that's going to qualify for an E2. But if you purchase a business under EB-5, then that money, if that money just went to the seller, then that actually is not going to qualify for the E2 for the EB-5. And the EB-5, the investment amount definitely has to be very strongly linked to job creation. The investment should be an equity investment, so it can be different types of equity. It can be membership units, it can be shares, it can be limited partnership units, but it should be equity and not a loan-based product. The second big part of EB-5 is job creation, and you have to create 10 full-time jobs. And those jobs are not just any jobs, they are jobs to US citizens or green card holders. And what we talked about under the direct investment, those jobs have to be employees of the actual they have to be employees of the actual entity. But if you're doing a regional center, then some of the employment, in fact, a large amount of the employment for regional centers comes from indirect employment. So that's something to consider. Again, the when you invest, the money that's invested has to be linked to job creation. So sometimes if you're investing over time, you do have to kind of pay attention to the dates, because if you want to count the jobs have to be created after you have invested the money. Often we'll need a business plan for both direct investment and the regional center programs. And you always want to, if you're doing direct investment, you always want to make sure that you use E-Verify to make sure that you're verifying the legitimacy of the people with green cards or with US citizens, because you can't just take for granted the documents that you have are real documents or valid documents. When you're filing a EB-5 petition, it's a three-step process. So you're going to file an I-526 petition and I-526E if it's a regional center. And then if you are in the United States, you can have the option of doing either consular processing or doing what's called adjustment of status. Now, adjustment of status for most people can be filed concurrently with the I-526 petition. And the benefit of that is the individual can get work authorization and travel authorization. And that's usually taking about 6 to 9 months. But that's a big change in 2022, where before that they required that the I-526 petition be approved, but now the individual can get quite a significant amount of benefit just by filing the I-485 petition. And then 2 years after you have the green card, you're required to file an I-829 petition, and that petition is something that shows that you have actually created the jobs that you said that you would create. So a number of changes in the program in 2022 that were made. The investment amount was increased, and it was quite significant for the smaller amount, because before you could invest 500,000, now you have to invest 800,000. But the higher end of the scale didn't go up much. It only went up 50,000. It was 1 million before, and now it's 1,050,000. And the regional center program is authorized until September 30th, 2027. But this date that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation of September 30th, 2026 is a very important date, because that's the date that you would have to file the regional center petitions by, in order to make sure that your petitions were adjudicated without delay. It doesn't mean you can't file after that, but it's a good idea to file before that so you can make sure that your petitions are in fact adjudicated without delay. The targeted employment areas, the government's the only one who can decide those now. And what the government has done is, and this has been beneficial, particularly for nationals from China or India, where the program was oversubscribed. So there were long waits for some nationals from those countries. The government did these carve outs for rural areas, high unemployment areas, and for infrastructure projects. And the those ones are all current still. So even when you go to the visa bulletin now, they're still current. So that's quite beneficial. The big change that I mentioned before, where you can file the I-485 concurrently with an I-526 as long as the category is current, and that gives you the ability to file for work and travel authorization, is a really significant benefit for people because they can live and work in the United States until the petition has been adjudicated. And sometimes these petitions take 3 to 5 years to be adjudicated. The source of funds is always going to be an area in EB-5 petitions that warrants a significant amount of scrutiny. In fact, for regional center programs, it's often the main thing that we look at, and that's the main time-consuming element of an EB-5 petition. And the government also did clarify loans are okay, whether it's unsecured or secured loans. If it is a secured loan, you would have to show where you got the money to buy the security. And if it's a gift, you would have to gift or loan, you have to show where the person who gifted or loaned the money got the money from. And there were a few other kind of small changes in the program that that benefited people. For example, if the regional center went under or something like that through no fault of the investor. So the program, like if you're doing a direct investment, you really do have to invest the money and put the money at risk. So you can't just put the money in a business bank account. You would have to actually spend some of it or have commitments against much of it. That's going to be very important. Loans and gifts are, we talked about those already. In terms of purchasing a business, if you're doing EB-5 and you're purchasing a business, that's often not going to work unless you're buying some of the business and investing in the actual business so the money stays in the business and moves, that money is used to job creation, for job creation. But keep in mind, if that happens, then the jobs that are already there won't count. And you got to make sure in your documents that you don't have any guaranteed return on investment. That's going to be important when you're pulling this together. And when, a lot of people, a lot of our clients move from E2 to EB-5, and you just have to you have to do that carefully and do that with a qualified immigration lawyer because it is something that the rules are different. So we really have to make sure that we are following everything to the T because the one thing about EB-5 is the examiners can be extremely exacting. So that's something to keep in mind. The program, it's taking 3 to 5 years to have I-526 petitions adjudicated, so that's something to keep in mind. Right now, a lot of categories are current, really for probably all countries, because most people do uh, the projects in TEA area, and that those are all current for the carve-outs that I talked about earlier, but those may retrogress or move into queues soon. So we have people that do kind of dual strategies. Like sometimes someone will do EB-5 and then they end up getting married, or they do EB-5 and they do NIW at the same time. Definitely that's possible and not a problem. I think that the key is planning, because if you do have an underlying visa, you have to make sure that you are able to keep that underlying visa, to the extent that you don't have travel or work authorization, that you are able to keep that underlying visa active so that you can stay in the United States. And those were really all the prepared remarks that I had for today. We can go check to see if there are any questions. I know that it's a lot of information, and it's one of the things that we suggest is if you do have specific questions or concerns about your situation, that you set up a consultation with us, and we can go through, in particular, the source of funds is something that we like to spend a lot of time with our clients, going through and making sure that their source of funds is not going to present any problem to them. So, but yeah, well, I don't see any questions. So, as I said, we will send out the details related to the guide, the video, the PowerPoint presentation to you. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to set up a consult. Thank you.